Today on Conversation Aloud, our conversation is about where the US is heading politically and the deepening divisions erupting across the spectrum, as we can all see, from the halls of Congress to dinner tables at home. We're joined by Paul Rader, who is a nonpartisan political analyst, a writer, a speaker, and the author of Why Independents Rarely Win Elections. I wonder that all the time. His work focuses on helping Americans understand the real forces shaping our democracy beyond the headlines and the party lines. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Hey, thank you for having me, Hadi.
Great to have you. So, Paul, from your perspective, I know there's a lot going on in the U.S. right now, and I'll ask you about how you view Trump. But from your perspective, what's the real root of America's political division today? Is it kind of economics of people who have more resources versus people that have less resources, or is it more kind of cultural about some people that want a certain culture to be had in the U.S. versus others that want a different culture, or is it a different ideological kind of force?
Well, I think if you look at the history of America, there's been some sort of divide, right? It's not necessarily a new thing. It's certainly reached some heights that it hasn't reached before, but I think it depends on where exactly you go. I don't think it's necessarily just everybody, oh, it's a culture. There's definitely a cultural divide. There's definitely some economic divides as well. And when we look at polarization, the way that there's not necessarily a specific way that people study it where like this is exactly how you measure polarization, but I think the easiest way to define it is there's partisan polarization between the parties, there's ideological between the ideological camps, there's issue polarization. I think the biggest thing, though, is just the affective polarization, which with an A instead of an E. That's describing our general feelings and attitudes toward each other. We all have this specific idea of how exactly people operate, what their culture is like, what they really think about politics in general. And we don't actually have this discussion about anything really, and you see people just have these information silos that they sit themselves in, and they don't ever really interact with anybody. So they get this idea of this is what these people are culturally. Oh, this is completely different from me, and it becomes this. There's a lot of this existential crisis that a lot of people see politics as, where just the very idea that somebody thinks differently than them is a threat to their existence. So if you look really, depending on who you ask, for some people it's definitely an economic divide. Some people it's just cultural, and you see people moving more and more to places where Republicans are moving more and more to Republican neighborhoods, and Democrats are moving more and more to Democratic neighborhoods. So there's just really just this general, a lot of it is social media driven and internet driven in general, just making these information silos where we just don't ever interact with each other in any sort of constructive way.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that social media is kind of is making people live in two different worlds almost, and it's polarizing them, and it's making them fearful, seeing the other side as the threat instead of your brother and sister that should be working together to build this nation. They're more now the enemy. And that's kind of obviously social media is feeding that, and it's kind of really pushing. You can really see that fear narrative, because fear is the best tool to get people to take action, right? You get them angry, you get them fearful, they take action, they move the way you want them to move, and it's an influence mechanism. So do you feel like now we're reaching a point where political identity is like a religious identity, something that people like really cling to? There's a big emotional part to it, and less of maybe a rational side of looking at each other and understanding each other.
Absolutely. And you go back to what I was just saying about this existential crisis that people feel. It's just the idea that somebody thinks and operates differently than them is some sort of existential crisis, as if just because there's somebody else that exists, that's a threat to my beliefs and what I feel. And it's a lot like sports. I mean, I don't know if you're a sports guy. I'm a very big sports guy, and I mean sometimes I get upset at the fan bases of other teams that I am decidedly not a fan of. Sometimes I get mad at fan bases that I'm a part of too, but that's obviously a lot less important in the grand scheme of things. But and politics is important, but we put too much of an importance on it where it becomes this whole this is who I am. There's I remember reading like about a month or two ago. There was a convention of some sort. I can't remember exactly where it was or what it was exactly for, but it was just basically talking about bridging divides. And Michelle Lujan Grisham, the governor of New Mexico, and the Republican governor of Utah, Spencer Cox, were basically talking about this very thing and how it used to be back when, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 years ago, people would lead or say, I'm a Republican or I'm a Democrat. That would be like 10 to 15 on their list of things that identified them. And now you see more and more people, that's what they lead in with is, I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat, I'm a conservative, I'm a liberal. And it's really, and to some extent, your politics are going to be part of your identity. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. But when people just make it such a core part that they just see anything different as criticism, that's where we need to take a step back and really think about how exactly we're tackling these difficult discussions.
Yeah. So you think that what's driving that putting importance on, your political ideology is social media.
It's definitely a lot of it. And really what social media does is it really just harnesses the power of our human nature. To some extent, we're social creatures, but to some extent we do have a little bit of divisiveness to us inherently that we need to fight back against. Whenever we see things that it's a lot of times it's very natural to get angry at something or to be fearful or to distrust or to be disgusted at things. And some things do require that kind of response. But what social media has done, and it's partly because of how much they've been able to study human psychology, they've really figured out, okay, this is how we get people to engage with our content most. This is how we get the clicks. This is how we get the money. And so they really harness our anger in particular and just really incense us against people that whoever these social media accounts are that they oppose most. They really say, see how stupid and terrible and awful that this person has said? We need to fight back against them. And so you just really harness our emotions for their own gain.
Yeah. And then it kind of pushes them into kind of this group think where you feel like you're part of a big, strong community that thinks the same and are right and the other side is wrong. And so there's only one way to approach this, which is your way and your group's way. Do you think that we didn't have that in previous years? I know you're interested in history a lot. Did we ever have such a situation in previous year? I'm sure maybe during wars or things like that this happened, but do you recall some periods that resemble where we are right today?
History has had that to some extent, especially if you go back to the Civil War. I mean, we became two different countries. Although if you ask Abraham Lincoln, he just saw the southern states as in rebellion, but the polarization has kind of ebbed and flowed. But now with how not just social media but the internet in general, we're a lot more aware of all these things going on. We're a lot more susceptible to these kinds of ploys to tug on our emotions. That it does seem like it's gotten to a height that it hasn't really been at for quite some time. But to say that polarization has become like this new thing that it's only been like the past 10, 20 years, I think is a faulty way to look at things. It's kind of been an ebb and flow. But now it's just the ways that the polarization can be harnessed and how aware we are of it, I think is a lot different just because of the spread of information.
Yeah. Do you have you found any common kind of misunderstandings between kind of people on the left and right that have about each other that kind of fuels this division?
So there are, I can't remember the exact studies off the top of my head, but there have been studies done in the past where people on the left overestimate how far to the right people on the right are, and on the right has overestimated how far to the left people on the left are. They
Mm.
overestimate the kinds of how exactly they think about it. Like if we talk about abortion, obviously a very touchy subject. A lot of Democrats and liberals see Republicans and conservatives as much more against abortion than the average is, because you usually hear the really loud voices that are very much against it. And then likewise, conservatives and Republicans overestimate how supportive that Democrats and liberals might be of abortion. Obviously, they have their own very loud voices on the side too. There's a lot more people that are kind of what we call ambivalent. They're like, oh, I support abortion in these cases, but not in these cases. And you can extend it to guns. A lot of people talk about, well, do you support gun control? Gun control means a lot of different things. Do we ban bump stocks? Do we
Mm.
ban automatics? Do we lower the voting? Excuse me, not the voting age. Do we lower or increase the minimum age that people need to be to buy guns? Again, there's an overestimation of how from the left on how far the right supports guns, and the right overestimate the amount that the left opposes the expansion of guns. So there's just this general misconception, partly because they just don't interact with each other enough, of how exactly not only what the other side thinks, but the membership of the other side too. So if you look at certain social groups, there might be an overestimation by Republicans of how many black voters are Democrat. There might be on the left an overestimation of Protestant Christians that are on the right. And so they just get this general idea of, again, that whole cultural divide of, well, these people are just completely different than me. So this is what this party is. And again, don't talk to each other. Actually try to figure out what the other side actually thinks. And there are studies that have shown that when they get together and they actually hear what each other has to say, they kind of temper what their viewpoints are, not just in terms of partisanship, but in terms of their attitudes towards each other.
Yeah, because things are not black and white, and that's the issue. Is that what we have in the media, what we have in social media, they try to paint this picture that it's black or white, but it's a spectrum. To your point, someone who might want some regulation around gun control, it doesn't mean he doesn't want any guns out there. He just wants a different type of environment where guns are given to people. And so it's always going to be a spectrum. And when we talk to each other, we realize, yeah, it's not that extreme between our side and your side. But the problem is getting people to communicate with each other and sit down, because I understand there's a lot of families that have broken up because of their politics. And that's a
Yeah,
very, I think it's more in the US than where we are here. I'm in the UK. We don't have that yet. Don't know whether we'll be heading there, but it seems like in the U.S. there is a big, big division even within families.
absolutely. And one of my biggest gripes is there's a lot of people that they think they have the world figured out. Nobody has the world figured out. Nobody's worldview explains everything 100%. If you take the US's system of government and put it in another country, it's not necessarily going to function the exact same way. Just like if you take some other aspect from another country's politics and apply it to the US, and it'd be the same thing for the UK or any other European country or North America, anywhere. You can't just, there's people that have, again, those people that have been information siloed. They have this idea that their ideological worldview explains everything. And the fact that somebody isn't thinking the same way is, oh, okay, because they're stupid, they're terrible, they're whatever. You can be very vociferously against Donald Trump or Kamala Harris or Joe Biden or whoever. You can still interact with people who support them. They don't necessarily support them because they're the voters that supported them are terrible people. They see things differently. There are a lot of people in politics that drive me crazy, and I have I don't specifically talk about them because I try to keep myself as impartial as possible. But I know that people that vote for somebody that I don't like, that doesn't necessarily mean they're a bad person. I might strongly disagree with them. I might strongly disagree with their worldview, but I know that I have my own biases just like everybody else does. So because of your biases, you're not going to understand everything completely. You need to be able to see how people think about things. And my views on things have changed over the years too. And sometimes when I've strongly disagreed with somebody before and I hear another argument, I was like, okay, I can sort of understand that. Not necessarily that I agree with them, but I at least understand why they think the way they do. So you got to remember, everybody's got their biases. We've got our own biases. Let's try to work together here so we can try to figure out where exactly the truth is. And maybe we won't ever find the truth just because of how flawed human nature is. But we can at least come to a better understanding of our world if we actually see how other people approach it.
100%. I think it's a different mindset, because one mindset is curious and looking to understand the other side. The other mindset is seeing how this person is attacking me and how I need to defend myself, which kind of closes you off and makes you not listen to the other side. It's very hard to kind of break through that. Do you have any kind of recommendations for people to be able to maybe listen more, to kind of jump ship to that curiosity world?
So, so I've actually been working on, well, one thing I've finished, and then one thing I've been working on. I've been trying to work on a TED talk and talk about some recommendations in that regard. But I also have a what is called an educational email course, basically five or 6 day course on how we talk about, or how we sometimes, not only when we're trying to depolarize politics, sometimes not only do we not are we not successful in that regard, sometimes we actually make polarization worse, because there are some people who they really want to fix polarization, which is obviously what we should be striving to do. But they sometimes come to it with a holier than thou attitude. We're like, well, I'm above the political fray. These other people are not. And they don't realize that the way they're approaching it, trying to get these polarized people to be less polarized, they're not going to necessarily listen, because like, oh, okay, you think you're better than us because you put yourself on a pedestal. So we got to, again, look at how we approach things. Not just the polarized people, but the non-polarized people. Don't want to push people away because you're coming to it from a, well, I've got everything figured out. You try to understand why exactly they think the way they do. Don't worry. Don't come to it so much as I'm going to try to change what they think. Nobody's changed their mind when they're being berated about something, or they think they're being berated about something. So at least come to it with okay, let me see why they think the way they do. And then you can actually start to prescribe exactly how to depolarize them. And another thing is from 2015, sort of a paradox of when you're talking about when news, the study found that news organizations, when they report on the level of political polarization, people temper their views about issues, but their affective polarization increases. So they think, okay, maybe I'm a little too far to the left, maybe I'm a little too far to the right, but their opinion of the other side increases. And then another study that built on that said, if you put a polarization warning where you say, studies have found that news organizations that are talking about polarization can actually increase affective polarization, that tends to temper the response by people to have a negative opinion about other people, where they say, oh, okay, just because we're talking about polarization here doesn't mean I need to get more against the other side. So it's that careful balance of, we do need to talk about polarization. It is a problem, but we don't want to get to the point where we're overselling it, where, oh, this polarization is just everywhere, and we need to get mad at other people even more than we already are. Because, again, this affective polarization, you can be partisan wise, you might not be polarized at all. Maybe you're ideologically you're middle of the road. Maybe you're pretty ambivalent about most issues. You can still be affectively polarized because you can still have very negative attitudes against other people. Affective polarization is the one that anybody, including me, can be susceptible to, and obviously I try to be as self-aware as possible. So just know when we come to polarization, we do need to talk about it, but we need to not also oversell it as well, because that can actually still drive people away.
Yeah. Do you think the U.S. is heading to more trouble and a sort of civil war based on politics?
The trend is definitely going that way. Do I think it will happen? I don't think so. I'm not necessarily always an optimistic person, but I choose to be more optimistic about this particular situation. I think you are seeing a lot more people really start to rise up with this concern of, hey, we need to cool things here. I mean, we just talk about what happened last week with the former Speaker of the Minnesota House, Melissa Hortman. Let's call it what it is. She was assassinated, and so was her husband. And there were several other lawmakers and their spouses that were almost assassinated. One, fortunately, he and his wife survived. So I think people are becoming more and more cognizant of, okay, maybe we all do need to cool it a little bit. But a lot of times they also think it's more so the other side that is going crazier. And
Yeah. But don't you
that's
think
just not helpful.
don't you think you need a leader to bring both sides together? Do you feel like Trump is that leader that's bringing people together, or he's more kind of dividing people?
So I try to keep my opinion about specific people out as much as possible, but I will say I think he could do a lot better in that regard.
Okay, fair enough. And so your assessment so far of Trump's kind of policies of him saying what he wanted to do and him achieving what he did, achieving what he said he would do, how would your assessment be of him based on that?
Like, as in his policy goals.
Yeah, his goals.
So again, I try to not delve too much in that just because I'm trying to be as nonpartisan as possible. I think he's definitely done a fair amount of what he said he was going to do. Now, whether you think it's good or whether it's bad, that's not for me to decide. I have my own opinions about it, of course, but I don't want to, especially in my own work, I'm trying to not take a side on anything, because if I do, then that's inherently going to shut out a lot of people, and I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to get more people to come to a place where they can come to a
Fair enough.
better
Yeah.
understanding. But at the same time, though, a lot of his platform, I think he has achieved what he set out to do. But again, whether that's good or bad, that's for other people to decide.
Are you seeing an emerging, any emerging political voices or movements that offer something new, like a new model outside the traditional left-right kind of world?
So there are definitely some independent groups that have been cropping up. There's one called the Independent Center, which does a lot of work in regards to both independence or independence in general, but also talking about how we approach political dialogue in general. And you've got ones like Unite America and several like big or at least third party movements that are trying to become bigger, like the Save America movement. But then you've also got others that are not even trying to elect independents or anything. They're just trying to get a general understanding of for everybody. I mean, not that the independents aren't. I'm just saying that they're working a little bit more towards getting more independence. There are some other groups called like the Builders Movement, for example, Braver Angels, that are just strictly about, we're not trying to elect anybody. We're just trying to get people to have better discussions. So yeah, things like Builders, Braver Angels, a couple of off the top that are escaping off the top of my head right now. But you do see more and more of those groups trying to really help bridge these political divides and not even concerned about who's winning or not, because we do have this issue in politics, just like in sports. We get too caught up in the results of the political process as opposed to the political process itself. The ends yes, they're important. How we get to those ends are just as important.
Yeah. Have you seen that movie by John? I think John Stewart produced it, where it's a movie about the Democrats and the Republicans finding candidates in this town that is unknown, and they spend millions and millions, and they compete just on this town. And the point is that we spend so much on the advertising that if it just went to solve the issues of the town would be a lot better. Have you seen that movie?
I have not seen that movie. I'll have to look it up. John Stewart, you said, did it?
I think he produced it, but
Okay.
it's a comedy. But I
Mm-hmm.
recommend watching it. It's very interesting. But to your point, this kind of change that I think people want to see in democracy of bringing people together. Do you think that will come from candidates that will come to be part of the Democrats or Republicans, or will they come from independents in the climate that we have and how the system works in the U.S.?
Well, I think it's going to have to come from all three of those camps, partly because of if you look at voter turnout, generally speaking, Democrats and Republicans vote at much higher rates than independents do. It's just how it works. And independents also have a much tougher time in virtually every instance on getting on the ballot, what we call ballot access laws, than Republicans and Democrats do. And the way that the U.S. political system, with the exception of a 10 to 20 year period in the first half of the 1800s when Andrew Jackson was president and it was really just the Democratic Party. Besides that, this has always been a two-party system, and a lot of that is because of what we call Duverger's law, which is not a real law, but it's a basically an axiom, I guess, that these kinds of the basically the U.S. system and others like it are given to having two major parties and not really a third major party. Now, maybe we will see a third major party at some point if the dissatisfaction gets high enough. But it's going to have to be independents are going to have to come in, Republicans and Democrats are going to have to come in because they are just such indelible parts of the American political system that part of the solution is going to have to come from them. And we don't want to exclude people. We want to bring people to the table. They have to come together. So it's going to have to be Democrats and Republicans and independents to give that incentive to the parties of, okay, we need to reel things back a little bit and start discussing things more often.
Yeah, but it's so hard to do when the system is created such that you attack the other person. When you look at kind of the
Sure.
advertisement and things like that, it's kind of, you're also attacking the other person, trying to bring them down, trying to label them as evil, that they will destroy the country, that they will, it's just so hard when that is the system itself
Sure.
to get that unity, right?
Well, I think a lot of that is because, or a big part of that is education, educating people on how this all works, this whole rage bait and clickbait and things like that. Really saying like, hey, these kinds of people are using your natural inclination towards being wanting to be angry at something. Don't let them do that. Now, I'm not saying that people are necessarily going to listen to that, but people need to become more self-aware, more educated about how these things work instead of just become, because like you said, the system's not going to change. Social media is not going to change its algorithms. So we need to take more agency towards how the social media algorithm works and really say, okay, you know what? I'm not going to be taken advantage of, even if it's from people I normally agree with.
Yeah. Have you seen have you heard of Cambridge Analytica?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's really scary. If anyone hasn't watched it, like watch some documentaries about this company essentially that leverage data from Facebook and other places to kind of create this whole profile about you that is extremely accurate.
Yeah.
And they use that to target specific advertisement towards your profile because Facebook can do that. What Facebook shows me is very different to what Facebook shows poll. And
Hmm.
so it's targeting that specific world towards you to make you feel angry, as we said, and fearful and hateful, and make you take action. And they've influenced elections in many
Yeah.
different countries. We had over here, they were part of Brexit for us to leave the EU. There were other elections that you could hire this company.
Yeah.
You pay them money and they will do this, whoever will pay them, basically, which is crazy, crazy.
Yeah,
Which,
and the whole data. I mean, that's obviously that's a part of elections, and there's nothing inherently wrong with using data to try to reach out to voters. But like you said, there is a certain fine line where it's just become so accurate about who you are and targeting and manipulating people that it is something that needs to be seriously talked about and needs to be addressed. We can't have it get to that point where it just can just so easily manipulate all of us.
yeah, because then it ends up being that we don't have democracy. Because in the democracy,
Hmm.
you're supposed to be making informed decisions. So how are you going to make those decisions based on the information that's given to you? Well, if I get
Yeah.
different information to what you're getting, we're in different worlds. We're basing it on different, completely made up things at times to
Yeah.
influence us, and that means that we're not really in a democracy. How can people fact check the narratives they hear without becoming, like cynics or conspiracy theorists? Like, do you have any kind of ways of doing that you'd recommend?
Yeah, and it's easy to become cynical. Sometimes I get that way too. One tool that I find very useful is go back to grade school, the 5 W's and how, the who, what, where, when, why, how. So when you have some sort of information, whatever it is, come into your mind, you start to think, okay, who's telling me this? What is it that they're telling me? When are they telling me in this process? Is this closer to an election? And so they have an incentive to tailor their message accordingly. Where did I see this information? Is it on TV? Is it on social media? Is it on radio? Why are they telling me this? And how are they telling me this? So you really think about, okay, whenever you're involved in politics, the goal is to win an election. And again, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's when you start doing everything you can, even if the process is terrible, to try to get that win. So you really think about that whole what's the source of this information and why would they tell me this? If people start thinking about that more and more, even if it's something that they are predisposed to agree with, you'll think, okay, well, at least, yeah, I tend to agree with this viewpoint, but why are they telling me this exactly? Okay, they're trying to get their candidate elected, but maybe there's something I'm missing here, because they're generally not going to give you information that says, well, this guy might be actually correct about such and such, but don't worry about him. They're not going to say that. They're going to say he's wrong about everything. So you really think about the whole, okay, well, they're trying to win an election. They're not trying to give me all the information here. Let me go somewhere else. And there are several places that you can go to. One that I will vouch for, and full disclosure, I used to work for them, but I am a firm believer in what they do before and since I've worked for them, is Ballotpedia, which is the Encyclopedia of American Politics. And they are strictly impartial. They
Can you
do
repeat
not
that?
add any
Ballotpedia?
sort. Yeah, Ballotpedia. So just
Okay.
like Wikipedia, but Ballotpedia, and they are very rigorously fact checked. I've seen it up close. They have a very robust team working on elections analysis, who the candidates are. They even have a sample ballot tool, and you can use their sample ballot tool to go to these candidates' pages and get more information from them, like their social media profiles, what is going on about them in the news. They're an incredible tool, and anybody who's voting, even if you're not voting, you should use them to know what's going on. And they've gotten much more into the local government stuff too, which unfortunately gets very little coverage. They only get like a couple of people that might cover some of these small places, unless it's like New York City or Chicago, where obviously those are a lot bigger cities. So Ballotpedia is a great resource to learn about just how the political system works, who's running for office, election history, election analysis, just to see more of the data side of things. Great resource. Pew Research Center is a great tool for public opinion polling. Gallup, also nonpartisan, things like that. So there are, unfortunately, the number of those kinds of sources are a lot fewer than the sources that are heavily biased to the right or to the left. But those kinds of sources do exist, and we just need to get more people to know about them and to use them.
Yeah, okay, that's really interesting. And what really worries me is the media, to be honest, because I'm kind of glad we have alternative media now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, but obviously, alternative media can also be a toxic place where you can just say whatever you want to say. But as an example, this kind of war that's happening now, the Iran, the U.S., kind of the Israel war, it's when I look at kind of alternative media and look at established media, it's like I'm looking at completely different things happening. They're analyzing it completely different to those people analyzing it there. And it's almost like sometimes I watch the news to think about what is their what do they want people to believe, right? And you could see it kind of almost like they're preparing people for war and why, for example, we should be bombing them, as if we've learned nothing from the Iraq war or the other wars that were occurring. And it's just interesting to see live how they're preparing and justifying what they're about to do, almost like the media is, well, certain elements of the media are part, like an arm of the government to prepare the people for the actions that the government is taking. It's just very interesting to see that. But at the same time, I'm glad we live in a world where there's alternative areas that we can go to see the other perspective, the other side, a different side to what's being showed in the established media,
Yeah,
for
well,
sure.
you look at. I'm not sure exactly how it was for the UK. Obviously, I know you've got BBC over there, but in the U.S. at least, back in the 50s and 60s when TV had just really started to become a thing, you had four channels that if you wanted the news, that's where you had to go. And I mean, obviously, you had newspapers as well, but for more widespread sources that you could go to, there was NBC, ABC, CBS, and then there was the now defunct, excuse me, Dumont. And over time, 80s, 90s, 2000s, the number of outlets have exploded. And on the one hand, it's great that we have more and more voices that can get their way or their voice out there. They don't have as much gatekeeping. But the other side is a lot of people that are very incendiary, and there's a much smaller barrier to entry for them to get into the the conversation. It's a lot easier for them to get in there and start finding their group because now everything is mass media has become so fragmented. Again, go back to those silos of information. It's so much easier to just find, okay, who is the person that is going to cater specifically to my worldview and not challenge it, and I can feel
Yeah,
safe in that. I
that's
can
the
just go
problem.
to them. Yeah.
Uh,
Whereas back in the day, there was we didn't have as much market research to really tell people how they can just cater to a particular segment of the country. But back then, it financially wouldn't have made sense for them anyways because there were so few of them. People were forced to have to go to a bunch of different people from different backgrounds were forced to go to a select few outlets. So it's great that there's a much lower barrier to entry so people like us can get our voice out there, but there's also a lot of people that, quite frankly, shouldn't really be putting their voice out there, but they can. And so you got a lot of another one of those, you got to take the good with the bad kind of thing.
yeah, 100%. Like with anything, there's always benefits and drawbacks. And to your point, what a lot of people will do is go to those platforms that validate their beliefs already and doesn't show them a different perspective. What do you think is the most important thing people can do right now to strengthen American democracy, regardless of what party they support?
Well, first of all, just actually take a step back, realize how, not necessarily that how you're contributing to the problem, but how you can be better about the solution. Because all of us at some point can get very can be closed-minded about something. It happens to all of us. It's a human thing, but for some people, it's just a chronic issue. So really think about, okay, I realize I don't understand everything. Let me, before I say something online about anything, let me take a step back, think about it, think it over, see if I'm actually correct about this. Because there's just this whole, everybody wants to be first to respond to something. And yeah, the people that support some sort of information being circulated, that's effective in circulating things. But people who hate that piece of information can be just as effective, if not more so, at circulating that information, because they're righteously indignant. Like, I have to say something about how stupid and terrible this is, but you're giving it attention, and now it's circulating more. And that's not to say that if something is racist, sexist, homophobic, or whatever, yeah, we need to say something about that. That we can't be okay with that, but not everything needs to be responded to, or at least not everything needs to be responded to right away. So let's have a little bit less of a whole, I need to say something first. At least try to understand, okay, am I getting all the information about this? Let me research it. And again, all these things are much easier said than done, but it's something that we all need to improve upon, including myself, to make sure that, hey, this is what's causing our issues here. We need to take a step back here and evaluate all the information, because I'm not getting all the information, but just because of how the media climate is. So realize that you don't have all the information. Actively go and try to seek it out. Listen to other people. Deliberately break away from your information silo. Even if you're not trying to seek out an information silo, it is very easy for social media, like we've just talked about numerous times, to create one for you, or the internet in general. Again, just let's take a step back, not respond to everything right away. See if we can find more information about things.
Yeah, 100%. And I believe also what you're saying is like being more of a stoic, really, to understand that, sure, some things are going to create emotion, but you don't have to react to the emotion. You can leverage the emotion. You can understand why this is creating an emotion. You can use that information, but kind of taking an action not from a very emotional place, but from a different, more stable place. So I think that is something that will help you in whatever part of life you are facing, or challenges that you're facing. Kind of taking a step back and not reacting immediately is always a helpful thing. Paul, it's been very interesting chatting with you. Where can people find more of your work, or if they wanted to reach out to you?
So, and thank you for having me on here. So I have a Facebook page, Paul Rader, author and speaker. My LinkedIn, you can follow me on there. Email me at paulraderwrites@gmail.com. So Rader is spelled Rader, so Paulrader, writes as in writing, at gmail.com. I have my own podcast, the Politics with Paul podcast. It covers political topics from a nonpartisan, non-ideological view. So you're in the UK. If you have a lot of UK viewers, I'm assuming, if you're trying to learn more about politics, or for any US viewers, anybody really can come there. I don't take a side on anything. I cover election results and history, and try to make things as easily digestible as possible while still being very informative. And excuse me, I talked about it a little bit earlier, educational email course. It's called the More Perfect Union MIDI course. If you go to detoxifyamericanpolitics.com, you can sign up for it there. All you need is just to put your email in. You'll get a short series of emails about how we can actually take steps to depolarize American politics, and some of that information could be used for other countries too, but it's more geared towards American politics. And believe that's it. And then my book, Why Independents Rarely Win Elections and How They Could Become More Competitive. Not saying that we need more independence or that we don't. It's just trying to talk about the roadblocks that they face in U.S. politics and some of the ways that they can potentially mitigate those obstacles.
Awesome, and we'll put that in the show notes. Paul, thank you so much. It's been lovely speaking to you.
Thank you.